You guys are very privileged today in that we're going to ordain deacons and elders. Yay! I think that's a great thing. Yeah, nothing wrong with that. And why you're so blessed is because that means I'm going to talk for a shorter period of time. So, thank you all so much. You know what? I just added 10 more minutes. I'm just kidding. All right. So today, obviously, the subject is going to be on servant leaders and what servant and what leaders are. Yeah, something like that. So when somebody says leader, if somebody says you leader, invariably somebody's image pops to mind, or you start thinking of somebody. National leaders like a president, past, present, or future. A great military general, like my personal favorite, General George Patton. That's where my thoughts go. And General Patton was unique and his leadership style could be summed up actually by one of his most quotable quotes. And that is, lead me, follow me, or get out of my way. I don't know if you've ever heard that before, but that is actually a quote from General Patton. Lead me, follow me, or get out of my way. But when I add one little word to the front of leader, a whole different picture emerges. And that word is servant. General Patton was a leader for sure, but not many would refer to him as a servant leader. A servant leader would never slap an army private suffering from dysentery and shell shock. Well, Patton did that not once, but on 2 separate occasions. Instead, the servant leader goes above and beyond. They scale the highest mountains. They cross the deepest seas, yet they remain humble and true. They often lead without words, but they use words when words are needed. They always demonstrate what it means to lead without being overbearing. They may have no title, but none is needed. It is leadership without grabbing at the straws of power. And that's something that a George Patton could never do. But it's something that we may be called to do. In our lives as servants and servant leaders, we should not be trying to become famous for our name's sake, but making Christ infamous among those that we know and love. I believe today that we've got 3 men for deacon and 1 for elder that exemplify much of what the sermon's about. That doesn't mean you can quit listening. This sermon is not about them, though, and it's not even specifically about them at all. It's about all of us. So here on this day when we ordain those that are to serve in the office of deacon and elder, you get to answer a question. Are you a servant? Are you a leader? Or are you both? So the first question that comes about, what's a biblical servant look like? And the answer is not some dark mystery of the church, because Jesus answered this clearly in Matthew 20, 25 through 28, when he said this about Christian leaders and what they should look like. But Jesus called them to himself and said, "You know that the rulers of Gentiles lord it over them, and their great men exercise authority over them. It is not that way among you, but whoever wishes to become great among you shall be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you shall be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to this his life a ransom for many." But a little context is needed before we dive right in. See, this verse follows one of those awkward moments that we see in the Bible. It's not awkward because it's a hard truth. It's because it's a train wreck. People think that quite often that the Bible is devoid of the uncomfortable, and it's always steeped in a cleansed picture of the disciples and the others in the Bible. But nothing could be further from the truth. Just prior to this verse, things were going really well for the disciples and Jesus. Jesus and his entourage were on their way to Jerusalem for Passover. He was preaching, teaching, blessing children. He just put down the haughty rich young ruler and even went as far to tell the 12 that they would be sitting on 12 thrones judging the tribes of Israel. But then mommy enters the picture. I can already feel the secondhand embarrassment as mom makes the case for her boys, James and John, to sit in the esteemed seats on either side of Jesus. And mom spreads it on thick too. She starts out by kneeling down, but then proceeds to get her point across with the bluntness of a billy club. She wants that special position for her little boys, and this understandably makes the rest of the disciples a little uncomfortable and irritated, to say the least. And even though the answer was not yes. So, Jesus takes the time to explain the difference between servant leadership that we see in the church and the leadership the world seeks out, like a General Patton. So, how can you tell if a person is a servant leader? Or more importantly, how do you know if you're a servant leader? Well, from this verse and others, I was able to pull out 3 attributes. That's right, just 3. You can tick them off so you know when I'm getting done. About servant leadership. First of all, it's not about the title. That's the first thing to know. When Jesus said rulers of Gentiles in this verse, the word used for ruler implies nobility of birth. The King James Version actually interprets it as princes of Gentiles. But they were not just some sort of ruler. They lorded their position over others. And lording a position over another is totally out of character for the Christian, regardless of who you are. And it's not only reflected in Jesus' own words, but in other passages in the Bible as well. In Philippians, for instance, it says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but rather humility. Value others above yourselves, and not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of others." And 1 Peter 5:5 puts it this way: "All of you, clothe yourselves with humility towards one another, because God opposes the proud, but He gives grace to the humble." If you think that you're superior due to who you are or what you've obtained, then you're in error, and you cannot be a servant leader. But wait a minute, isn't that what we're going to be doing here today? Aren't we going to be giving out titles to people? Well, I could dance around that with semantic games, but that would be disingenuous. So, yes, we are giving out titles today. We are filling offices that are delineated in the Bible. And these men and many others in our congregation carry the titles of elder and deacon. The important thing is not the title associated with the name, but the character of those who have the title. Are they lording their title over you or leading by example? Do they show compassion in leadership, or do they tie heavy burdens on people? Remember in Matthew 23 when Jesus came down pretty hard on the scribes and Pharisees and their hypocrisy, when He said they tie up heavy burdens and they lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves are unwilling to move them even with so much as a finger? The scribes and Pharisees may have had a title, which they did. They may have been recognized as leaders, which they were. But they should never be confused with a servant leader that we are called to be. Fortunately, our leaders here at Berean and the ones to be ordained today are not the kind of people that snap their fingers in demand. I am sure you've got stories and personally witnessed each of them carrying the burden of hard work and service as an example to others. And honestly, they would hate me to say it or brag on them, but we've got tremendous servants here at Berean Christian Church. And this is not just regulated to the men with titles. No, it's not at all. We recognize the role of men in the church and the importance of the requirements of elder and deacon, but we've got ministry leaders, men and women, regardless of title, that lead by example. Tremendous people. Titles have their purpose. but titles are always secondary to a true servant leader. The second attribute, number 2, the second attribute for a servant leader is a lifestyle of service. In this verse that we're looking at today, notice that it says, shall be your servant. It doesn't say might be your servant or may be your servant or might be your servant on Tuesdays or Thursdays. It's much deeper than that. It's a lifestyle and reputation that's built over time. As an example, around Murfreesboro, there are precious few really fancy restaurants. You know, we're the barbecue capital of Illinois, which is great, but we're not blessed with a lot of places that have cloth napkins and white table linens. But if you've ever been to a real fancy restaurant, you know what it's like to have true service and to be served. Years ago, I would go out to eat with high-dollar attorneys courting business, and oftentimes I'd find myself in a place that not only had polished silverware that was actually silver, but they also had not one waiter per table, but a cadre of servers assigned to each. You'd barely take a sip of water, and somebody would be there to top your glass off. It was really impressive. It really was. The restaurant made their money on good food, but it was great service. It's how they established their name and their reputation. Serving others was not something they did. It was the thing they did. That needs to be the reputation of Berean Christian Church and honestly of all Christians. What is our reputation? Are we known for being servants? Is helping others the matrix by which we determine our success? Or how we determine our success here at Berean? If we are truly servants, then one of our successes comes from helping others. So if this is true, if this is something that servant leadership and being a servant is all about, then that comes with another question. Okay, who should I serve? Well, according to Galatians 5:13, it says, you, my brothers and sisters, are called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another in humble love. We're to serve each other. We're also to serve the Lord. In Joshua 22:5, it says to follow the commandments, of course, to love the Lord your God, to walk in obedience with Him, to keep His commands, and to hold fast and to serve Him with all your heart and all your soul. We are to serve the Lord. And lastly, we are to serve the world. Jesus said, and whoever shall force you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Now that's in reference to a Roman soldier could force a person to carry a pack with them for 1 mile. But we're called to go the extra mile as Christians. Of course, in the first century, you could be compelled to serve at the point of a spear, but we need to train ourselves through the Spirit to see the needs of others. Without the mind of Christ and the Spirit within us, we will be self-focused and oblivious to the needs of others in our church family. We'll be oblivious to the needs of God and our community. Skilled servants and thus servant leaders are to be sensitive observers as well as being excellent at meeting needs. But remember this, even if you have the mind of Christ, and even when you're prompted by the Spirit, it can be hard to serve other people. Is that true? Yeah, it can be hard to serve other people. They won't acknowledge you. They don't thank you. They may reject you or criticize you. There are just some people in this world that if you gave them bricks of gold, they would complain about the weight, the brightness, and how yellow it is. It's a fact. Now, if you are being served, don't be one of those people. Just stop. Just stop being that person. Be grateful. But if you're the kind of person that is serving them, then take your lumps and continue to do so. Colossians 3:23 says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as if working for the Lord and not men. This verse goes on to say, because you'll receive an inheritance from the Lord as your reward. It is the Lord Christ that you are serving. The last point today and the last thing is that so we're almost done, number 3. The third attribute is that a servant leader does not have their own agenda. Slave is a very harsh word in this day and age. People don't like to say it, but it clearly points out what our goals should be in Christ. So we need to discuss the term and understand it to grasp what Jesus is getting at. He says that we are to become servants to be great, but slaves will be first. Whoever wishes to be great among you shall be your servant. Whoever wishes to be first among you shall be your slave. But what do these words really mean? Well, the word for servant is diakonos, which is translated in the Bible specifically to the office of deacon, or in this case, one who executes the commands of others. If you want to be great, according to Matthew 20, in God's kingdom, you must be a servant by executing commands. Slave, on the other hand, is doulos, devoted to another to the disregard of one's own interest. That's how you become first. The goal of your Christian faith should be to be so devoted to the agenda of God and others in God's service that your agenda diminishes to the point of disappearing. This is a significant difference. As a slave, you're not a servant asking as asked, but instead you're adopting and living the agenda of God. Being a slave to God first is the key, because only through Him will we be in line with the godly needs of others. We must be God's slave. That's a harsh truth this morning. As promised, here's the conclusion. Although we don't like to say slave anymore or even discuss it, it's something that everyone here and everyone outside of these walls knows something about. You see, because everybody is a slave. The question you have to answer is, who are you a slave to? Who will you serve? We can live with God's direction and agenda as our choice, or that of the world. And that's the very choice that we have today. There is no middle ground. But most of the world, and probably many here, are blind to the fact that they're living in servitude. As the Bible points out, either you're a slave to sin or a slave to righteousness, but the world has been so deluded and so dulled in their minds to that choice that many don't even know that there's a different way, there's a better way. Because the God of this world, Satan, has blinded their minds to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel and the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. That's 2 Corinthians 4:4. And this has led to the spiritual bondage that abounds today, even in our own community. People in droves have given up on the agenda of God, and they've adopted the agenda of the world. Vanity, pride, envy, drugs, sex, money, murder, mayhem, longing for what glitters and teases the eyes and tickles the ears. They think they're adopting and fulfilling their own agenda, and that they are in charge. But they're truly deceived as they've rejected God and are completely blind to who and what is really running and ruining their lives. The famous preacher Charles Spurgeon put it this way: so the choice is not, should I give up my freedom so I can submit to God? Rather it is, should I serve sin or should I serve God? That is the true choice that so many are blind to. So today, let's lift the scales of blindness from our eyes and the eyes of the world. And to do so, we need more Jesus, demonstrated through being servants to God and Christian servant leaders. But let me warn you right now, this is not an easy path, nor is it one that's accomplished in a day, a month, or even a year, but instead a lifelong agenda to a lifelong dedication to a different agenda the agenda of God. And this is your opportunity today to start that new agenda. An agenda of servanthood and commitment to God through His Son, Jesus Christ.